Quick question, do you produce the fruit that proves you really understand the gospel of the kingdom? So today we're finishing up on the last part of our series on the parable of the sower found in Matthew chapter 13. Now, as always, if you've missed any of the other parts, make sure you go back and watch them so that you can get the full context on everything we've been speaking about so far. And you can get the link for the playlist in the description below. And so in this video, we'll be focusing on the seeds that landed on good soil and produced fruit. And you can find this in verse 8 of Matthew 13 and further explained by Jesus in verse 23. So let's get into it. Verse 8 says, "Still other seed fell on good ground and produced fruit, some 100, some 60, and some 30 times what was sown." Then Jesus expands on this in verse 23 and says, "But the one sown on the good ground, this is the one who hears and understands the word, who does produce fruit and yields, some 100, some 60, some 30 times what was sown." So first things first, the seeds that fell on good soil produce fruit. Now we don't have any idea how long it took to produce fruit, and we also know that it happened in varying degrees, with some producing more fruit than others. But one thing that we can say for sure is that if the seed, the gospel of the kingdom, landed on good soil, meaning we've really understood it, we must produce some evident fruit. Some will produce more and some will produce less, but regardless of how much, there must be fruit. So what is this fruit that we're expected to produce? Here are some quick reflections. In order to understand what the fruit should be and what it should look like, we need to look to the seed. For example, if you plant apple seeds, you expect the tree that grows to produce apples. And that's because obviously the seeds that were sown were apple seeds. And the seed can only produce after its own kind. So in our context, knowing that the seed is the gospel message of the kingdom, then whatever that fruit is, it should be the naturally expected outcome of really understanding the gospel message of the kingdom. So what does that look like? Well, examples might include refusing to blindly follow the world's pattern of thinking and instead being changed by the renewal of our minds. It's being somebody who visibly reflects the fruit of the Spirit that is listed in Galatians chapter 5. So love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. It's being people who willingly surrender to the lordship of Christ, meaning that we no longer live life just doing what we want or what we think makes sense. Instead, we recognize that our way is usually corrupt and wrong. And in light of eternity and the new heavens and the new earth that we're being prepared for, we know that following God's way, the kingdom way in all areas of our lives, is what should be our priority instead. And the other thing to remember about fruit is that it usually carries seed. And so in our context, part of the evidence of us really understanding the gospel message of the kingdom is us becoming people who constantly put the gospel message on display. And it happens through our conversations, through how we engage with others, and even how we wrestle in prayer for those that we know to be far from God. If we really understand the gospel message of the kingdom, it will compel us to become those who are concerned about others, understanding and receiving the same life-saving, eternity-giving gospel. But if our lives don't show this to be something important to us, then maybe it's because we don't really understand the gospel of the kingdom as much as we think we do. Because when we do really understand the gospel, Satan can't derail us like the seed that fell on the path. And when we do really understand the gospel, then we won't crumble and fall away when we face difficulties and troubles for choosing to follow God's way rather than following the world's way of thinking. And when we do really understand the gospel of the kingdom, then rather than being consumed by the worries we have of the future we have in this life, we'll submit those worries to God, trusting that He'll sustain us as He always has, and knowing that even in the worst case scenario, we have an eternal hope that can't be shaken or taken away. And so what's the case for you, my bro, my sis? Where do you stand when it comes to producing fruit? And let me be really clear, because we know from scripture that this walk is really a journey. We don't just arrive overnight, but over time, we should see some areas of growth, areas where we look more and more like Christ than we once did before. And that is the ongoing journey that we have as children of God. And so if you're watching this and you're feeling down, or like you're constantly failing, or not even being able to see any fruit that you've produced, or even if you flat out admit that you don't understand the gospel of the kingdom, then just know that that can change today. Pour out to God, admit that you're not too sure, and ask Him to give you a revelation of the gospel of the kingdom. The same gospel of the kingdom that Jesus came and preached about. The same gospel of the kingdom which the early disciples were persecuted and went through all kinds of madness, even costing many of their lives. The same gospel of the kingdom that has the power to change. The one that Paul even went as far as saying, "I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is the power of God unto salvation." You need to contend to understand that gospel. Reach out to others who you know to be more experienced than you to ask for help if you need to. And don't let pride or even your reputation or the fact that you've been around the church and Christianity for many years be an excuse for you to say, yeah, I don't need to learn that again. Humble yourself and do whatever it really takes to get to grips with this. Because after all, eternity is on the line. And so do you produce the fruit that proves you really understand the gospel of the kingdom? Peace.